raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens, bright copper kettles and warm woolen mittens, brown paper packages tied up with strings. These are a few of my favorite things.
There's a rare breed of person who inexplicably chooses the path of most resistance. They have an unrelenting skepticism of suppressive powers that fuels an unruly flame of rage in the face of injustice. Such a lifestyle endures endless adversity. No one is to be trusted, not even yourself. And stagnancy is a clear indicator of your enslavement. Masters, suits, conformist drones, all of those who benefit from or inform their principles through traditionalism revile any threat to complacency, the benevolent bullshit of conventional life. However, these proposed threats are lies perpetuated to create false divides in diversity in markets. Perhaps the first to confront and later fall victim to this harsh reality was baby boomers during the hippie movement. The 60s counterculture peddled a promised pathway to pleasure and fulfillment through the unsuppressed consumption of drugs and sexual exploration, and while by default countercultural, as the movement continued and waned in relevance, it proved to be little more than a mere reflection of Western consumerist logic. The idea that mindless adherence to instant gratification is the path to satisfaction. This defective ideology is what punk sought to challenge and viciously replace.
The whole music part of the hippie thing was this overindulgence.
The hippies ruined everything.
People's attitudes had changed from being, uppity and let's have our rights to being compliant and being resigned. I think that was a strong turning point for me. It was right when punk rock was rearing its ugly head.
However, for all its criticism of the 60s counterculture, invoking the precursors of a strange addiction later to be traded in for something more orthodox, punk lost itself just the same. Too many egotists shouted at perceived opposition, and confused conformists joined misfit communities to find themselves, but instead found uniforms and arbitrary standards of adherence. Punk rock cannibalized itself with lost followers, bad actors, and endless internal scrimmages over what it meant to be a true punk. As a result, the movement became fixated on superficial signifiers of validity instead of the foundational attitude that once defined it. This idea is encapsulated in the lyrics of Chicken Shit Conformists by Dead Kennedys. Punk's not dead. It deserves to die when it becomes another stale cartoon, a closed-minded, self-centered social club. The joy and hope of an alternative has become its own cliche. Make the same old mistakes again and again. Chicken shit conformists, just like your parents. This phenomenon to me does not speak exclusively to the shortcomings of counterculture, but to the very essence of Western society. Nothing notable goes untainted by capitalism. Through this system, we anticipate an unprecedented amplification of our passionate pursuits, expecting that in return, we can find meaning in a confusing, turbulent world. Instead, we face an empty existence of constant production and consumption where our creativity becomes a hollow commodity instead of being allowed to flourish on its own merits as a cultural marker. Such a fate feels inescapable. Once capitalism sets the goalpost, we run circles around it, with the satisfaction we were promised just out of reach. Those who fancy themselves rebels often erroneously assume that by defying that typical flow, they can attain that of which they feel denied. However, the rogue wanderer will likely pass familiar faces in this doomed pursuit, indicating that they too are stuck in an endless loop. Capitalism oppresses, so those forward-thinking few feel compelled to fight back and make a statement demanding change. And just as capitalism manufactures a problem, it sells a solution. So many raw and rebellious movements have yielded to the cognitive anchors that weigh down their members. They develop factions, labels, and outfits to function as identifiers that hold no inherent meaning, but teach people to itemize each other just the same. Such tribalistic tendencies are ripe for exploitation. Thus, counterculture becomes a product, a lifestyle you can buy and sell. I feel that now more than ever, the punk rock philosophy is elusive. Some might reflexively scoff at this sentiment, writing off punk as a glorified fad that attracted an undesirable menagerie of petulant, often privileged youths. And while there is some truth in this, and I am privy to the movement's flaws, I would like to cut the bullshit of arguing its legitimacy. Given all considerations, I find value in punk, and this conviction has only grown with experience. Instead of deconstructing the prototypical image many might have of a punk.
What the fuck did you become a punk for? You see, Russ, mods are pussies, man. The shit's fucking dead.
I want to establish what the attitude means to me, and why it has continued to inform how I move through life. The punk rock attitude is best defined by what existentialists call living in good faith. In other words, it is the freedom recognized within oneself that reaches for authenticity. Now, paradoxically, I don't believe freedom or authenticity are attainable, but I advocate for pursuing such things because a worthwhile life strives for the impossible. I suppose this is the balanced contrast of the nihilistic perspective, the idea that you are at the mercy of both everything and nothing. By defining the punk rock attitude as a way of living in good faith, it has become evident to me that punk is untethered to a time or a place. For this reason, I find it irrelevant to overview its history. Plenty of video essays and documentaries have done that already anyway.
Who cares who started it?
I believe punk existed far before people named it in the 20th century. There's always been a select few who have exemplified this way of life without wearing spikes and leather. Perhaps you have a person in mind, a philosopher, a poet, an eccentric, or an artist. However, people do not exist within a vacuum, and we are more of a product of our environments than we might like to acknowledge. For all we know, experience is all that separates the tyrants from the revolutionaries, as is the illusion of free will. While punk exists independent of era and location, its form and prevalence are impacted by such variables. With that in mind, I argue that the punk ethos has become increasingly elusive because we live in a period of heightened consumerism, mindless conformity, and shameless superficiality, all attributes of living in bad faith. Many would blame modern advancements as a primary contributing factor to society's current state.
Many of today's teens spend way too much time on their phones, and it could be hurting their health. 13 Action News anchor Dana Roselli looks into whether smartphones are destroying a generation.
The internet, smart devices, social media, and AI have rendered the world unrecognizable from what it once was. Conversely, humanity's folly precedes our high-tech era. I submit that these advancements only exploit and consequently intensify the worst tendencies already present within people. One way this occurs is through algorithms, which have become a popular topic amongst many psychoanalyzing today's zeitgeist. In many ways, algorithms cater to the comfort people find in easily recognizable patterns. We tend to create mental shortcuts through categorizations, allowing us to streamline our understandings of the world. We've taught algorithms how to efficiently sort through endless amounts of information put out online. As people have increased internet usage, this learning has become reciprocal, accentuating our propensity towards grouping to the point of producing thinking in an algorithmic way. Much like computers, we have come to codify our understanding of people based on surface-level attributes, discarding holistic considerations of an individual's characteristics. This typical formula sorts people into groupings based on isolated traits, such as opinions, interests, and lifestyle choices. These classifications are most effective if they have names, cliches, and one or more prominent exemplars associated with them, demonstrating how a person from a group likely thinks and behaves. For example, someone who likes Fight Club might be called an edgelord and likened to Chris Ray Gun. Of course, stereotypes play a role in the grouping process, as apparent when I express my personal enjoyment with the film. Because my demographics don't fit the typical target audience, I may be met with confusion over why I enjoy what is often erroneously considered an edgy white boy movie. In my case, the label of choice would most likely be a pick-me. One final factor to consider here is who is designating the grouping. A Gen Xer, for example, tends to have a different perception of Fight Club than a Gen Zer. As such, the contrast between my perceived age and the media I appreciate, a consequence of my upbringing in a lower class household, may result in my being labeled an old soul, which, depending on the person assigning the grouping, can either be a term of endearment or a taunting pejorative. This tactic reduces the mental resources expended in considering another's inner workings and establishes implicit rules that dictate socially acceptable behaviors. Unsurprisingly, a reactive conformist response tends to follow, but the response isn't always antipathetic. Sometimes reductive groupings provide a sense of belonging that reinforces pre-established belief systems. Other times, it leads to abandoning personal judgments to feel accepted. There is another inauthentic reaction to rejection that I like to call anti-rebellion, because it seeks a different type of conformity through thoughtlessly abandoning popular beliefs. Those who succumb to this line of thinking will defy the waves of the mainstream simply for the sake of it, even if the tides are flowing in their favor. Some people do it because they feel othered, often due to misunderstanding things like identity politics or feeling personally attacked by exaggerated or caricatured opinions online. Others are even more lower-minded, opposing whatever they see as the most widely held opinion. Such insipid logic ignited arguments that conservatism has become punk in recent years, because left-leaning and progressive beliefs have become more mainstream.
Conservatism is the new punk rock. You can't be the dominant culture and the counterculture. That's why conservatism, or a particular brand of it, is becoming the new counterculture.
These people believe in obtuse sentiments like Elon Musk. Why are people raging for the machine? Obviously referencing the band Rage Against the Machine. There's a tendency to mischaracterize vapid, contrarian provocateurs as authentic and therefore punk, but they are, in fact, neither. Maybe being a rebel without a cause was acceptable during the growing pains of adolescence, but whoever remains disruptive without a reason in adulthood certainly has no sense of self and is, for lack of a better word, a dumbass.
As you can see, I'm not just MAGA, I'm dark MAGA.
Still, these musings only hold if you take what people say for face value. And I do not. I understand people can be profoundly half-witted, but it's hard to believe the empty logic behind holding conservative values for the sole sake of contradicting the perceived mainstream. I presume that anyone who was punk in their early years and purportedly switched from left to right-leaning values was either entranced by the irreverent aesthetic of the scene, but never actually cared about its message, or they've always held conservative beliefs, but had a self-serving sense of rebellion that fizzled out with time.
God bless President Bush and God bless America.
This is remarkably exemplified in legendary guitarist Tom Morello's tweet from last year. It never ceases to amaze me how many folks who've heard of Rage Against the Machine are in Paul Ryan mode, having literally zero understanding of anything that band was about, and even less understanding where any of us might stand on contemporary issues. I was recently talking to a couple at a restaurant who were big fans of Killing in the Name of. The nice lady said, "I love that song. It helped me rage against my parents and later the jab." The jab more than likely referencing vaccine denial. I said, "Ma'am, that song is about racist cops who often behave like the KKK in service of historical white supremacy and are bootlicking lackeys and thugs of the racist capitalist ruling class." So perhaps anti-rebellion is merely a facade to cover confirmation bias and reaffirm adherence to antiquated value systems on the justification of fighting oppressive forces of the establishment. After all, it's easier to legitimize your views by victimizing yourself instead of reflecting upon and directly confronting why people might criticize you. Often you'll find that those who label themselves conservative punks talk a lot more about being suppressed by the mainstream for their political leanings than actually sending any specific message. For example, in an interview, former Misfits singer Michael Graves briefly listed his affiliations and claimed that he was being mistreated based on his identity as a conservative.
So this isn't the first time I've been canceled, and certainly won't be the last. So this tour that I have is called American Prayer. At least it's upwards now. It's 6 venues that have canceled me. Why have they canceled me? I've been canceled because I am associated with conservatism. I'm associated with patriotism. I'm a Trump supporter. I'm a Christian. I'm white, and none of these things fit into what has now been called punk rock. The punk rock of today is much more like, it's exactly like the white supremacist movement, the skinhead movement of the 80s that eventually died off and was beaten in the 90s.
Not much can be said regarding his opinions, since the particulars of his beliefs aren't readily apparent. Mainly, I take issue with this intentional vagueness leading to a victim complex. It seems like people such as Graves have repurposed labeling systems used against them to give validity to their politics through a self-pitying ruse. We currently live in a time where many conservatives now argue that people who are trying to silence them is further evidence of their disruption to the status quo.
I believe that there's folks like me that look at it differently and are part of and leading a revolution, if you will, a renaissance in art and music.
Through this faulty logic, they feel vindicated in openly submitting to conventionalism. Contesting with the idea of one finding genuine authenticity in conservatism feels strange. In my view, right-leaning ideology gives into the quintessential failings of bad faith living, such as mindlessly conforming to societal norms and denying readily apparent realities that challenge those pre-established values. It appears that this belief system forgoes critical thought and relies too heavily on external authorities like religion, institutions, and traditions to guide one's actions. Therefore, conservatism surrenders the personal freedom to seek authenticity in favor of a guided assurance through familiarity, comfort, and self-approbation. At the very least, if conservatives want to demonstrate their punk rock sensibility, they can show some fucking teeth in the face of adversity instead of constantly whining about cancel culture. Being banned from venues for being contentious is the name of the game, to such an extent that the Bad Brains have a whole album called Banned in DC. But when punks of the past couldn't play anywhere, they didn't have defeatist attitudes. Instead, they persevered and did things their own way, as was the story of how CBGB in New York grew its significance.
It wasn't this exclusive scene, you know? It was just that no one else wanted us, and this is where we ended up.
But to briefly argue with logic a conservative might better receive, venues are free to do what is in the best interest of their businesses. If they or their customers don't want you to play, it likely reflects an inadequacy of your product and your inability to sell it. So it sounds like the free market is just filtering itself out. However, I do think it's worth directly addressing that to many, leftism has become associated with political correctness. While this perspective may seem new, it has been a lingering argument of right-wing populists and pundits dating back to at least the early 90s.
There was even an issue that came out in Newspeak magazine called the Beware the Thought Police, and I figured, oh, maybe I can actually put down money for Newspeak again. Maybe they're finally talking about these fundamentalist ministers trying to knock Madonna videos and Public Enemy and Two Live Crew off the air and out of record stores and off radio. But oh no, the Thought Police are people such as African Americans, feminists, Asians, Hispanics, people who want something in these school curriculums other than white male European history. They accuse the so-called politically correct of being the new McCarthyism, but what it really is McCarthyism against people who don't toe the line.
But the concept appears to have gained widespread popularity in today's digital age. I suppose this is partially the reason for the knee-jerk jolt to the right for many hyper-individualists.
Identity is not and will never be something that people define subjectively, because your identity is something that you actually have to act out in the world as a set of procedural tools, which most people learn, and I'm being technical about this, between the ages of 2 and 4.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
While I can understand the frustration of being told how to conduct yourself, I don't think this irritation should cloud earnest judgment. I have said it before, but it's not what you think, it's how you think. On paper, I hold a lot of leftist values, but how I came to those conclusions sometimes vastly differs from how many within that space did. Herein lies the primary distinguisher that separates anti-rebellion from sincere deliberation. Can you trace your logic detached from the expectations of others? If all you can say is that you are the antithesis of those who attempt to control you,
we're bored with your intellectual left-wing ideas.
That's simply another form of conditioning, not free thoughts. That doesn't mean you have to fit the perfect mold of the leftist label. In fact, I would discourage it. I think the most prominent fault of modern day leftism is there are too many followers afraid of conflict, afraid to genuinely question commonly held foundations, to be imperfect, to be wrong. The problem with conformity in the left wing is that it's the precursor to inevitable conservatism, perhaps a different brand than what we're currently familiar with, but conservatism nonetheless. If former hippie baby boomers weren't enough of an indicator of this, I don't know what is. People like to believe that they are logical, but so much of what actually drives us is our emotions. In many ways, how things appear to us supersedes reality, so we can't break the illusion or even begin to identify the fantasy. These labeling systems we use, while practical in simplifying conversation, are intrinsically meaningless, yet we end up swallowed by them, losing sight of who we are. Being a leftist, a conservative, a good person, a punk, it is all a lie. None of it means anything until you assign meaning to them. I won't disregard the utility of abstract labels as they pertain to language, but they speak to our feelings, not our reality. This is why for every generalized critique of the left online, there are tens of hundreds of comments not contending with the argument, but hyperfixating on the label of leftist in and of itself. All arguments against the left are often said to speak to the liberal ethos, not the real left. This is laziness disguised as nuance at best. The dogmatic denial of leftist error and the insurmountable yearning to push all shortcomings onto the generalized liberal, these obfuscations remain to be some of the most fallacious arguments of the online left to date. Perhaps it is not society that is conclusively wrong about what they observe, categorize, and label the left wing as. Perhaps some within the left are too verbally combative, defensive, and averse to change to understand that there may be severe misalignments between their thoughts, words, and actions. In other words, if the critiques towards the popular left sound like critiques to liberals to you, perhaps it's because you sound and act like a liberal. Another contributing factor to intensified conformity is the fear of missing out, or FOMO. Such trepidations have drastically been amplified due to increasingly fast-moving information and trends. At a point, there were light pressures to keep up with relevant pop culture, such as catching the new sitcom episodes, reading about celebrity gossip, or staying current with fads. Now there is such an enormous landslide of micro-trends, TikTok phrases, memes, and drama that it has become an anxiety-inducing task to keep up with everything. And if you're out of the loop, you may face feelings of seclusion or judgment amongst your peers. On more than one occasion, being unfamiliar with or uninterested in popular online content has hindered me from contributing significantly to conversations amongst coworkers. I've also faced scrutiny from younger peers for being unacquainted with politicized internet terms, as it was with the case when I first learned what a TERF was. I was confronted with a wary, almost contemptuous look when I paused in confusion after being told J.K. Rowling was a TERF. The concept in and of itself was a familiar one I've encountered within feminist literature, but I had not yet heard that specific term. It was as if I failed an unspoken test, proving myself complicit in something, or perhaps demonstrating that I did not run in the correct circles. The pressures of FOMO intensify online, partly because people are more candid and won't hesitate to dispense malicious jeering. In the digital realm, many seem to abandon approaching others with nuance or understanding. So if one fails to circumnavigate social media pitfalls, there's an increased chance of inadvertently fitting a stigmatized cliche, leading to mockery and in some cases, dogpiling. If one proves to be ill-informed or out of touch, they will likely be labeled a normie or cringe. These snappy but disqualifying terms can often stand alone without necessitating further elaboration because internet standards function as a subtext that the well-indicted intuitively understand. Thus, most feel compelled to be up to date with online pop culture by by understanding, finding interest in, or having opinions on things they may otherwise be indifferent to. In addition to instilling inclination towards conformity, FOMO accentuates the consumerist tendencies bolstered by misguided capitalist values.
I have the best advice for women in business. Get your fucking ass up and work.
The concept of achieving meritocracy through a free market is seductive because it suggests that we live in a fair system that rewards people based on their hard work. Not only does this ignore societal disparities and the exploitative measures used often to procure wealth, but it also spawns the flawed idea that people get what they deserve and they deserve what they get. By extension, one's worth is measurable by superficial markers of success, such as luxury items. Similarly, capitalism has ingrained the idea that we can secure an identity through merchandise, almost as if our spending habits define us, leading material goods to be attached to a sense of self, provoking a heightened sense of urgency when coveted goods are elusive, time-sensitive, or in limited supply. Again, this phenomenon has long since existed, but the internet has contributed to the absolute commodification of our lives, subsequently increasing consumer anxiety. Looking at past media, such as the movie They Live, we see that decades before social media, some were already overwhelmed by advertisements exclusive to magazines, television, and billboards. Now, everyone carries a personal advertiser everywhere they go as a staple part of their day. Worse yet, many are addicted to their smart devices, unwilling to embrace the reality before them out of fear of enduring boredom during empty gaps when there is nothing else to do. So we find ourselves continually accosted by ads. The appearance of advertisements have notably changed as influencers have become the primary vehicle of modern-day marketing to the younger generations. Some have exploited our Western predispositions, flexing their exorbitant wealth to vulnerable fan bases, exploiting and reasserting the idea that the rich are worthwhile people who procured their status for a reason. And by extension, others can achieve success too if they are willing to work hard enough. For a period, this gave rise to grind culture. People of varying demographics watch such content and believe their favorite influencers got to the top because they deserved it, not because they were lucky or possibly took advantage of people. Over time, after numerous controversies and scams, more skepticism and stigma surrounded the idea behind grind culture. However, this matters very little to its most infamous purveyors, as their cancerous brands have been able to metastasize, extending outside of the confines of the internet. Even if you forego social media entirely, you'll still find yourself face to face with the commercial excrement, purged from the bowels of reprehensible figures like the Paul brothers, who have products in major storefronts nationwide. Even our televisions are smeared with the doings of their unsavory discharge, advertising gimmicky spectacles such as the Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul fight, which proved to be severely underwhelming to anyone who gave it the time of day. Still, New Age marketing is multifaceted, often selling us the aesthetic of false authenticity. Parasocial relationships give way to feelings of approachability that make us want to put faith in the earnestness of our favorite internet personalities, feeding the desire to support them however we can. In this way, the internet becomes a twofold escape. On the one hand, it provides users with endless entertainment and the illusion of meaningful attachment to the people who make it. On the other, creators have a viable out from financial trappings. With just a bit of luck, the most unskilled person can find success in influencing. Because necessities have become more elusive as the internet has become more accessible, even the average person with no interest in entrepreneurship is understandably willing and ready to commodify themselves online. In tandem with influencers, the advent of the pandemic solidified malignant shopping behaviors as a staple in our society. Young leftists, many of whom use the internet frequently, have developed a palpable dissonance when confronted with the problems they contribute to through their shopping habits. As a result, they devise convenient excuses through common political talking points. In my Temu video, I covered various problems relating to companies like Temu or Shein, from worker exploitation to environmental issues and the impact of overconsumption on poor and marginalized communities. Yet, some people still contrive reasons why these two specific companies are necessary, saying they provide affordable plus-size options while ignoring a pile of issues so enormous it is literally visible from space. The sad necessity of the fast fashion industry in the present day is undeniable due to its affordability, but my suggestion never surrounded the very privileged outlook we should just stop buying fast fashion in general. Rather, it was to stop propping up net new brands like these two who present the same issues on a much larger scale. That's not really unreasonable, because what were you wearing before Shein and Temu came out? At times, it appears we find any reason to make frivolous purchases, and when it comes to movements, it can come across as absurd, hypocritical, and vain. In response to the election results, some thought it appropriate to suggest buying blue bracelets to signify their solidarity with left-leaning ideology and compassion towards marginalized communities. I can't even call this a quick bandage to a significant event that will impact us all. Instead, it appears people found a self-righteous way to center themselves among political turmoil in the form of a fashion statement, which I don't think anyone was in the mood for. I worry that by constantly succumbing to consumerist thinking, earnest causes will continue to become meaningless, self-serving fads. As I suggested in the beginning of this essay, while conformity can begin suffocating a movement's rebellious flame, making it less diverse in thought and stifling transformative innovations, consumerism snuffs it out completely. Capitalism is a fascinating beast because, at least initially, it invokes such a powerful drive in people, giving way to some of the world's most captivating cultural advancements. However, it also hijacks our motivation and therefore our reasoning. Other cultures underpin their heritage with rich value systems that permit their unique customs to flourish for centuries. Conversely, under capitalism, very little of our American culture is sustained unless it continues to make a profit. And the staples of our society reflect that. Major companies such as Disney and Coca-Cola have been able to continue touching generations for over 100 years because they are lucrative brands. On the other hand, alternative subcultures such as hippie, punk, and grunge have all become anachronisms, stripped of their meaning and cultural impact after being reduced to bastardized commodities.
It's so profitable. It's so profitable, and they'll just keep taking and taking and taking, and they just don't know how to restrain themselves. You know, they're frothing at the mouth over this. They're trying to fulfill this kind of hype. It can destroy everything. It can destroy what's real, which is like music to you. You know, it can make it a commodity.
All that said, I am not a staunch anti-capitalist who believes we should practice the most extreme forms of moderation and discipline. By all means, you should live an average life, buy things, sell things, enjoy entertaining distractions. But without some level of restraint and critical thought, we lose a much-needed balance. So while it's important to recognize external pressures that compel our behavior, we should still assume responsibility for defining and attempting to uphold personal standards. The do-it-yourself or DIY ethic is a core value in punk that provides a potential out from passive consumerism. To me, it is one of punk rock's most powerful virtues, which has opened my mind to possibilities of independence through creativity.
Punk's visual art was deliberately simple, DIY. Anybody could make it if you had a demented enough brain.
Growing up in the South, there weren't a lot of options for punk clothing. What's more is that around this time, Hot Topic was becoming more and more commercial than what it already was. And at least in my area, they were mainly selling stuff relating to emo styles and emo bands. And of course, I'm talking about My Chemical Romance side of emo, not groups like Jawbreaker or Sunny Day Real Estate. Regardless, Hot Topic and stores like it were expensive for a teenager's budget. Even if I found something I liked, I usually couldn't afford it anyway, so I had to thrift and DIY most of what I wore. This became one of my favorite meditative practices. I would spend hours listening to loud music while playing with fabric paints and haphazardly threading self-made patches onto clothing. Much of my attitude towards art developed during this integral period, and I am thankful for that. Many creatives find themselves bogged down by the comparisons they draw between themselves and artists who have mastered their craft. Meanwhile, the DIY punk philosophy provides a sense of liberation by celebrating the human quality of unpolished work. This alleviates anxieties for striving for perfection, inspiring the confidence to try new things.
Work made me realize that you don't have to be professional. You just have to have passion.
It inspired a lot of people to...
as sloppy as you want. And that's what made me start playing guitar. I was intimidated when I first started playing guitar by really professional musicians, like heavy metal musicians who are very anal and technical. And
with this mental framing, not only can we openly acknowledge and learn from our mistakes, but we can also appreciate the beauty in imperfection.
Wabi Sabi is an Eastern tradition, Dad. It's celebrating the beauty in what's flawed. Sometimes it's the small imperfections that make you love something even more.
The artists in the audience may be familiar with a famous book called Art and Fear by David Bayliss. If so, you may already be aware of the parable of a ceramics teacher who split his class into two groups, one graded on the quality of a singular piece, and the other for the quantity of work produced. While the first group obsessed over theories behind making high-quality ceramics, the other group continued creating and learning from their mistakes. In embracing the process over the outcome, the quantity group made better quality work than the group that only needed to make one perfect piece. If art is a human expression, we should focus on the joy of creating instead of fixating on where things went wrong. In our competitive world, it can be easy to hyper-focus on the end product. And as AI has grown more competent at generating aesthetically pleasing images, extending its reach to physical forms like sculptures, artists lament what that says about their pastime. When it comes to career artists, these concerns are legitimate. Right now, almost every job is potentially threatened by AI, which is a haunting thing to consider because it was supposed to help. However, for those ready to give up on pursuing art out of passion because they could never beat a machine, I think it's worth remembering that the experience of creating is what makes the practice worthwhile. After all, we remember Bob Ross not just for what he made, but for the emotion and perspective that he lent to the process.
We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
Given this perspective, DIY isn't just fun, it's empowering. The possibilities are limited to only your imagination. You can make almost anything, from t-shirt designs to jackets, zines, and even movies, provided you have the budget and ambition. A big part of why I admire indie horror is that they have to work within their limitations and mistakes. The apology scene from the original Blair Witch Project serves as a great example of this. During this part of the movie, the actress accidentally zoomed the camera closer to her face than originally anticipated. But instead of reshooting, the mistake was left in, resulting in the most famous scene in the film, a happy accident. A fulfilling DIY experience seeks creative ways to make the best of what's right in front of you. A mistake, limitation, or problem becomes an opportunity. For example, I am a collector of VHS tapes, and at times I have loose copies and blank tapes without sleeves. One day it occurred to me, why not make my own? Now I have taken to buying sleeveless tapes and watching the film as I draw on its box. Not only is it fun, but it saves me money. DIY is also a great way to reuse things. If you don't want a shirt anymore because it's uncomfortable or doesn't fit how it used to, why not cut it and make it into a bag patch? The other remaining bits can just be used as a washable rag for household chores or other artistic endeavors. With enough imagination, the DIY process feeds itself and rewards your creativity. In this sense, DIY further emphasizes the process art philosophy, making the act of collecting materials and contemplating their potential use as an art form in and of itself. DIY does not merely have to be an individual experience, it can also prove to be an invaluable way to connect with those you care about. By DIYing with the little ones in your life, for example, you can help foster a sense of independence early on, guiding them with principles that train their artistic eye to see potential beauty in almost everything. By doing so, you instill self-reliant value systems, demonstrating the possibilities discovered through ingenuity. From my experience, it doesn't take much effort to accomplish this. Most kids intuitively understand this thought process, so adults only really have to spark a flame and provide encouragement that shows that DIY isn't merely arts and crafts that you abandon after you grow up. Instead, it is a virtuous lifestyle everyone can benefit from. Hell, even given enough time, you can probably learn a thing or two from children. After shopping for winter clothes, my kid insisted on saving all of the tags off of the clothes. I wasn't sure why at first, but after a few hours passed, I saw that the tags were repurposed into cute little paper crafts. After being radicalized by the recycling episode of Rocko's Modern Life, my kid insists on saving everything around the house to be made into a project or to be properly recycled. In addition to DIY, going to the recycling unit has become a regular family endeavor. The internet has given way to a new avenue for DIY, and in theory, permits more authentic and diverse content. Focusing on YouTube, my familiar territory, we no longer rely on studio executives to determine what is worth promoting and watching. As a result, Anyone with a camera and internet connection can be in the public eye. However, being at the mercy of algorithms in major companies like Google has reinstated many of the same issues we had hoped to leave behind. Though I genuinely enjoy the scripting process, I cannot lie and say producing content online feels wholesome or empowering. The reality is that I must keep up with trending topics, which I often fail to do, maintain a relatable persona, which I also fail to do, and stay advertiser friendly. On occasion, I feel free to talk about something I care about, but for the most part, I cater to irksome expectations for the sake of revenue. However, this experience has lent me a greater perspective on content creation that I never considered while being a casual viewer. While we are periodically gifted with original quality videos online, creators are more likely to be rewarded if they copy a proven formula. Thus, we often see slightly different flavors of the same product. Many YouTubers become complacent in this cycle, churning out safe content that will ensure continued success. However, those trying to balance the pressures of making money with the desire to be creative often feel trapped. Knowing the difficulties of growing a platform from original ideas, they use what they know works as a stepping stone, but often find it difficult to fully transition to the projects they actually want to make. So what initially feels like a tool uplifting freedom and individuality becomes another corporate rat race. In addition, instant regular access to our audiences further increases pressures to adjust content swiftly and frequently. There was a time when receiving feedback for art took longer if it wasn't given face-to-face. Typically, this input came in the form of broadcasts, newspapers, and magazine publications, centering on the voices of only a handful of people instead of hundreds and thousands of instantaneous comments. A great example of this is a video called Nirvana Reacts to In Utero Critics, where a few college students got a free copy of the band's new album and were asked to return the next day to discuss their thoughts.
A lot of the lyrics I thought were just thrown in. I mean, they could have deeper meaning, and I tried to really analyze them, but some of these lyrics just seem like, I think if I was stoned when I listened to it, I might like it better. But I don't do that anymore.
During this time, individual creativity had more of an opportunity to flourish in a way that was true to the artist without a constant window into the thoughts of others. Now, we make multiple thumbnails just to see what people will respond to better. To clarify, I do enjoy making videos. Periodically, I work on video projects for my family or coworkers or special events. Though the audience is significantly smaller, I get much more satisfaction from sharing my work with people directly in my life. In removing all of the aforementioned concerns, I feel like I can make something more candid and true to who I am. Conversely, posting online feels akin to the stress of submitting a college essay. Only you have hundreds of professors critiquing your work, a minority of which engage critically. Fortunately, unlike college, you get paid for the belittlement, which is the only consistent motivator that keeps me coming back here. This serves as another more personal demonstration of how authentic passion can be diluted by commercialism. Still, it's a reality I've learned to reconcile with, since the extra income is helpful in a world where Capri Suns are now sold as individual pouches for $1 each. Serendipitously, as I was finishing the script for this video, prominent alternative music YouTuber Finn McKenty revealed himself as a sellout during an interview discussing why he quit his channel Punk Rock MBA.
I don't have any interest in music at all.
Well, I guess I can't really call him a sellout, since by his own admission, he never cared about music and his values always aligned more with making money than anything. While I'm not surprised by his stance, I was shocked by how apathetic and straightforward he was in laying out his motives. He barely emoted as he openly admitted to merely filling a gap in the YouTube market, putting in minimal effort to create content he cared little about. At one point, Finn mentioned how he felt compelled to curate his videos to be more palatable, removing jokes because viewers would get agitated.
You would throw in some jokes and like your opinions on stuff, and that was like fun.
I stopped doing that though because it made people angry.
Based on this statement, some in the comment section felt he quit due to an inability to handle criticism. However, Finn claims he was only concerned with giving the people what they wanted.
Like, it's just crazy that so many people, like, they would get so upset about you just casually a one-off comment about, like, you know, a band that they love, and you're not even saying they suck. You're just like, yeah, well, that could have been better, like whatever it was, you know.
Well, whatever, you know. Yeah, I'm just here to give the people what they want.
Considering his seemingly lack of emotional investment in his former content and his background in product design and marketing, I have no reason to speculate on other ulterior motives. It makes sense to me. He is a businessman, so he made his product as consumer friendly as possible. The only thing that potentially contradicts this point is his his history with the alternative music scene. But people change. I wish I could give more insight into why this shift occurred, but he didn't find it necessary to divulge an explanation. He simply doesn't care. And I guess it is what it is.
Like, is that why you started making videos, just because of all the negativity?
No, it's because like I don't really have any interest in music. I was just doing it for the money and I hit my financial goals. And so there's really just no reason for me. Like I don't have to keep doing it.
For this reason, his perspectives and former proximity to the alternative music space online make him an interesting case study. In many ways, he has a commonality in the current internet culture, a passionless entrepreneur who marketed himself through an opportune niche market on a profit-driven social media platform. While this happens frequently, these profiteers often don't want to be upfront about their intentions because it exposes the unsavory reality of our cherished online communities are, in some way or another, lucrative capitalist products. Generally, it's not good business to admit you are manipulating people's interests and emotions to build an audience for the sole sake of money, not unless that's your brand. In recent years, many have concluded that Western culture, while historically empty and profit-based, seems increasingly meaningless. Quoting an excerpt in the book Commodify Your Dissent, in the United States, where political change means finding new ways to redirect wealth into the pockets of the already wealthy, and where political dialogue is an elaborate charade that excludes dangerous and difficult topics, one must look to the literature of business to find serious talk about national affairs. The great earth-stopping subject in business literature of the last decade is the fantastic growth of the culture industry. As the nation advances into a golden era where ever-accelerating style and tude feel ever more rapidly churning cycles of obsolescence, and where buying things is believed to provide existential satisfaction, the product and distribution of culture has become increasingly central. To give a TLDR, while Trumpers rally behind the idea that their messiah can save the country by running it like a business, they failed to see it was already functioning like one. Thus, the attention of those who have or want power follows the market. Right now, the most impactful market to exploit is that of ever-shifting online culture. That's why the wealthiest man in the world bought Twitter, and legislation threatens TikTok. While many conspiracy theorists may posit otherwise, it's not an attempt to control the people or their ideas. The elites have long since accomplished that by making us addicted, complacent consumers. No, they want to control our culture and time, the hottest commodities on the market. And to do that, they must monopolize all of what we consume. The delivery of such glories as interactive media, it is hoped that it will open vast uncharted regions of private life to business colonization, will organize human relations generally around an indispensable corporate intermediary. Every imaginable type of human relationship can now be reduced to digital. We will each be corporate subjects and consumers and providers of content. Now, I do think it's worth mentioning that this book was published in 1997. You gotta love how things change while staying the exact same. When I saw this video by Finn, it immediately made me think of this book's section about the new Gilded Age, because the unfiltered thoughts of business-driven individuals provide a lot of perspective about the happenings in our culture. While it may seem frivolous to consider the thoughts of one former content creator, this is the image of the new entrepreneur, a self-interested person catering content to a select community with a palatable persona. I'm not saying that all creators are this disingenuous, but I'd be willing to bet that the most successful among them utilize manipulation in some form to secure their positions. What's more, it's likely that a lot of them, even if initially passionate, care little about what they do and go through the motions to produce content for profit. Why would we expect anything different when social media platforms condition users using a science similar to casinos to reinforce lucrative behaviors? And because our roles on these platforms are reciprocal, the reward system impacts creators and consumers alike. And so, insincere yet charismatic entertainers prioritizing marketability are the most likely to be rewarded for their content. In turn, we consume an increasingly hollow and inauthentic culture, making obsolescence an ever more rapid inevitability that invokes the continued production of insipid manufactured replacements that will never satiate us. For commerce, this is opportune because it ensures there is always a demand, always a gap in the market, and always a person or group of people willing to supply a new cultural product. By proxy, regardless of what we consume, this cycle feeds the corporations that make our connectivity possible. With that optimistic framing in mind, let's put aside my postulations for just a moment and explore Finn's. Like many YouTubers, Finn's primary concern when first building his audience was visibility, because without it, you lack opportunities.
People just didn't care about me. When I applied for jobs, I kind of never really got anywhere with it. When my name came up, it just didn't really mean anything. Opportunity tends to go to people who are visible.
More accurately, he started YouTube because of his lack of visibility in his particular field. Interestingly, he distinguished that his focus was achieving general notability, not social media success. To him, this endeavor was a means to an end, which reflects many prominent figures who grew themselves on the platform and proved equally as passionless in their pursuits. While there exist creators who put impressive work into their projects, effort is not the prerequisite to building a successful channel. Since there was a deficit of alternative music creators on YouTube, Finn established himself in the market through an accessible niche. Arguably, the lack of competition in the space allowed him to set his own quality standards, which turned out to be, by his own admission, mainly low-effort regurgitations of Wikipedia articles.
Yeah, a lot of them just like, I literally just read Wikipedia.
After recounting his contribution to the online music space and what it meant to him, Finn gives insight into the community as a businessman who unambiguously has no love for the subject matter on his defunct channel. He asserted that the only way to find success in online music content is to either talk about contentious subject matters like sexual assault or to feed millennial nostalgia.
There's only two options. If you want to have any sort of an audience in this space, number one is to talk about millennial nostalgia music. The other option is talking about sexual assault.
Building upon this, he argued that the death of the monoculture is most likely the reason for continued interest in older bands.
All that stuff was a product of another time in which the monoculture existed. So that's the world we live in now, is just sort of like a very fragmented landscape of, we'll call it like micro celebrities.
However, Finn doesn't see this reality as a detriment because our fractured culture allows for more opportunities to forge a brand, with the main pitfall, at least in the commentary space, being the need to talk about the same things ad nauseum.
I think it's a better, like, we're better off now for sure that, you know, that there's more opportunities for people to, you know, build a brand and have an audience and stuff, you know, in sort of these little niche categories. I think that's a better place.
Unfortunately, his take on probable success in the rock music industry proved less auspicious. The interviewer pointed out that many online musicians with big followings have poor turnouts in in-person events.
Artists I know who like have millions of followers on TikTok, but then like they can't sell out, you know, the venue they're playing on tour. It's way easier to hit that follow button than it is to like get in your car and drive and pay $12 and stand in line.
I think there's a lot to be said about this because many artists don't simply want to find success online. They want to transcend to something more tangible. This is especially true for alternative musicians, many of whom emphasize the role a crowd plays in the artistry of performance.
If the audience was not there, we would be practicing. The energy that happens between a band and an audience is the thing that can elevate the moment.
However, this perspective was not readily taken into consideration as Finn had this to say.
Yeah, like if you can't make money, if you're getting millions of eyeballs on your shit and you can't turn that into money, like, you suck.
At this point, it may seem like I'm trying to paint Finn in a bad light, but I don't care enough about him to even do so. I care about him as much as he cares about music. What I find interesting is the cold, unapologetic affirmation of the evident relationship between art and business. The two mix like oil and water. To be clear, I don't hold this view because I think something is wrong with artists, at least not most of them. As I said before, I'm not against artists profiting from their work. I'm against excessive commercialization because it smothers the arts. Finn is demonstrating how those who are driven by commerce think. If your art doesn't make money, you suck. Just think what this implies about social media companies and who runs them. These profit-oriented thoughts aren't only applied to artists, but listeners as well.
The reason why they're charging $500 to see a fucking band that was washed up 20 years ago is because people will pay it. It's so bizarre to me that there's a world in which people don't want to just accept that supply and demand is a thing.
This sentence felt like the most out-of-touch opinion expressed during the interview. The implied message from Finn seemed to be that people should grow up and face the realities of the real world. What his argument neglects is that to some, especially those in the alternative space, there is a hyper-awareness of how supply and demand function, and its consequences fuel a potent discontentment. Not everyone accepts the conventional standards of success defined by the tenets of enterprise. Being as that may, they join alternative communities to find, an alternative. They seek an avenue offering an outlet for freedom in various perspectives. The hope is that others within that space, especially artists, feel the same way. Alternative speaks to the radical desire for a way of life that offers something more substantial than what's commercially available. Those in this space want to find value and validity in people beyond profitability. Thus, it makes sense for them to be disappointed when the artists they admire become sellouts. I don't think it's wrong to crave some sense of semblance of integrity in our greed-filled world. And while it is rare, there are artists who have stuck to their beliefs. Fugazi is a legendary post-hardcore band that, despite their prominence, never sold merchandise, pushing the message, "You are not what you own." As far as I'm aware, to this day, only bootlegs of Fugazi merch can be found, but nothing official.
I don't know if you have noticed this at all, but there's some gentlemen outside who are selling t-shirts, and we just want you all to know that they're completely and utterly unauthorized by us. And while they might have a charity in mind, they never asked for our consent. We never would have given it, and we think they've kind of disrespected us in that sense. With that, you want to buy it, your business. I think $20 is too goddamn much for a goddamn shirt, in my opinion.
To reiterate, I'm not against artists making money off their work, and I'm not against merchandise. However, it is admirable when you find a truly sincere person. It's even more awe-inspiring when you discover that that person is responsible for making art that is significant to you. That is more valuable than any product you can put a price on. And with that said, I hope that as we continue to use social media, we keep our perspectives aligned, understanding that these platforms don't care about our art. Hopefully, if we retain this understanding, we can hold some semblance of control over our culture and actively participate in it again instead of continuing to be passive consumers. I want to take an aside to acknowledge the probability that life is devoid of all purpose. Every label, name, and value system humans have produced responds to the ever-lingering possibility that we are nothing more than the result of a cosmic accident. Punk, like everything else, holds no inherent meaning. It's just another name for made-up postulations attempting to make sense of a chaotic world. However, I believe where these ideas become more grounded is in the experiences of the people who give them meaning. A person's philosophy isn't merely a cold summation of their identity or value systems. It's the essence of their story. I use punk rock as a backdrop to demonstrate this point because the changes in my musical taste over time reflect the critical phases of my life. I still remember that fateful day when I was playing Crazy Taxi and for the first time heard All I Want by The Offspring. The song was energetic and poppy enough to be palatable to someone unfamiliar with the genre. However, it spoke to a potent desire for freedom, which resonated with me growing up in the restrictive confines of the conservative Bible Belt. My fondness for music grew after hearing the song Scream Out by The Unseen, which quickly became the theme song of my early punk days in middle school. Continuing to explore the genre and valuing personal freedoms above all else, I was engrossed in revolutionary literature and became an anarcho-syndicalist. During this period, I listened to groups like Apolitical and Witch Hunt. Eventually, though, disillusionment gave way to a new kind of frustration, where I once believed Thoreau when he said, "Government is best that governs not at all, and when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have." I started to understand that the abject cruelty and selfishness of people may not allow for such a reality. During this turbulent period, ideals began to shatter, giving way to an affinity for more disorderly sounding music like The Casualties' Suicide suicidal tendencies and Black Flag. Coming out of high school and being thrown into the realities of adulthood, my music taste became more subdued and reflective, consisting mainly of 90s alternative and grunge, Pearl Jam quickly becoming one of my favorite bands. But punk still lingered in my mind, and when I returned to the genre, I still enjoyed many of the same bands that I grew up with, but my new favorites proved to be more sober and more thoughtful. Dead Kennedy spoke to my critical, sometimes cheeky outlook on the world, and Fugazi represents my drive for authenticity. I am very eager to continue exploring these periods of profound transformation, and I'm curious to see which soundtracks will inspire me next. With that being said, I would be remiss if I did not mention a couple of new age punk artists I feel should get more love.
Man, acting like I'm actually fucking do that. I don't want to take cash. I want to take life through the fucking cash and all that bullshit.
If for no other reason than to piss off the punk purists who may have stumbled across this video, I wanted to find a place to fit in NASCAR. For as many people who may call him not real punk, which is ironically one of the greatest compliments in the scene, his crude and simplistic energy made me feel something I had not in a long time. Regardless of the genre box you want to place him in, he scratched a lingering itch in my brain, causing my synapses to fire and that mysterious neuropath provoking the thought of,
whoa, that's fucking punk, man.
His music is unapologetically deranged, ugly, and unapproachable, often coupled with batshit insane music videos that are, if nothing else, fascinating to watch. I feel that he helps push the expected boundaries of the genre that should continue evolving to remain challenging. His raw musical spirit harkens to the stripped down, unpretentious sound of early punk. Reich Spit is an honorable mention in the same vein as NASCAR, merging abrasive rap with punk rock themes. If you want to check him out, Ruckus is a song I often go back to. Now, if you want some really good music, and I mean really good, I cannot recommend Soul Glow enough. I just found out about these guys a few months ago and they are criminally underrated. I could say a lot about how they are insanely talented, making experimental, intricate, and at times catchy music. However, it's better if you just go and listen to them. Gold Chain Punk is a great place to start. So for now, back to philosophizing. So far, I've remained relatively vague about what it means to embrace the punk rock attitude, and intentionally so. I think the ultimate aim of punk, attaining authenticity, is less important than the process of getting there. In my youth, I once said that life isn't about finding yourself, it's about inventing yourself. So you should create something you're proud of. The process of accomplishing this is like a messy art project. Throughout the undertaking, you will make mistakes, and it will take time, effort, and willpower to refine your skills. However, if you're honest with yourself about your desires and shortcomings, recalibrating accordingly, you'll naturally find the closest thing to authenticity through this practice. The horror and beauty of life is that you will never see that final image. You'll work on yourself until the day you die, because humans are as ever-changing as their environments. I hope this illustrates why I said authenticity and freedom are unattainable, but a fulfilling life aims for them anyway. I realize that I'm speaking in indistinct abstracts, and that's because everyone has a different way of seeking authenticity and holds varying expectations for life. There is no blueprint. In many ways, it's life's most formidable DIY project, a more impactful statement than any decked out jacket. It's a way of living tailored by you, for you, according to your abilities and aspirations. Still, the path before us is particularly arduous, and it's hard to determine what the future may hold. Regardless, it's safe to say that things won't get easier for those seeking to live earnestly. I want to re-emphasize that present-day people are no better nor no worse than those of the past. Corporate entities have always used wily tactics to secure our attention, time, and money. However, now these exploitative measures are far more prevalent, accessible, and addictive. We have been thoroughly conditioned. From the moment we put down our devices to go to sleep, to the moment we awaken and compulsively pick them back up. Worse, our new world leaves little room for mystery or personal discovery. Upon losing direction, we look to the internet to quell our doubts and align our perspectives. With endless information and instantaneous connectivity, we never have to consider who we should be or what to believe. Our thoughts, especially those that are dismal and uncomfortable, can be conquered with the illusion of personal progress through vicarious contemplations, or, if all else fails, with convenient distractions. With that said, where does that leave the current state of punk. Clearly, the music still exists, even if it is underground, which I prefer, but because the essence of the attitude is untethered to a time or place, it's a given that there will always exist those who embody its core values on an individual level. However, bearing in mind the general submission to conformity and the absolute commodification of our lives, the cultural state of punk seems inauspicious. The current zeitgeist has facilitated the mass production of false authenticity into yet another product devoured in excess. If my theory of consumerism holds, punk certainly lies in its grave. Throughout the process of writing this video, I have contrived a reassurance that punk is simply elusive, but not lost in the modern day. Perhaps it's because I understand that we need the punk rock attitude now more than ever. Plus, it is draining to land on a hopeless conclusion. But while I continue to script, facing the brink of the new year and all that it will surely bring, it's apparent that punk is dead, and we have killed it. And much like God after the age of enlightenment, a cultural void lingers with the potential to be filled either by a new virtue or unbridled heathenism. So far, I've chosen the latter. And I'm tired of pretending things will change for the better. So this time, just this once, there is no call to action, no quips or optimistic chaser to wash away the bitter taste of despondence, merely the obligatory, until next time, bye.